Welcome to Minerva, a monthly show where we discuss the mysteries. We hope to give you enough information that you can go away and do your own study. Today we're going to discuss the Turin Shroud. But before that, I would like to introduce you to my co-host Duncan.
Hello.
And of course we are at home at the moment because of the COVID-19 pandemic, so we're not in our beautiful temple, but we still want to bring you a monthly show with something of interest. So let's get into it. What is the Turin Shroud? Well, essentially it's a long piece of linen cloth which claims to have the negative image of Jesus on it. Now it's clearly and not obviously painted, although some people do believe that there is some paint on there, but it is said to be used as the burial cloth after the crucifixion. If this was proved to be completely authentic, it would be a priceless relic. However, the church is still unwilling to say 100% that this is authentic. Now, there have been many shrouds, and the one that we're going to talk about, the Turin Shroud, originates in Liéry in France. Now, it was kept, or as the story goes, it was kept by a crusader family who brought it out at the right time, feeling that they wouldn't be persecuted for stealing it over the ages. Now, it is kept in a temperature-controlled box in the Turin Cathedral, and it's been there since 1578, so it's been a very, very long time. In fact, it's not on display, it is only brought out to be shown at special events, and when it is brought out, you can bet there's a huge, huge crowd. Now, the image is much, much clearer in black and white. When you just see the shroud, you can see the face and you can see the body, but it's not completely evident. However, when a photographer was granted permission to go and photograph it for the first time, he found a shock when he was developing his photographs. He could see the image really clearly, and, of course, he thought it was Jesus staring back at him. So, that's the early history. That's the bit that we have got to start talking about in regards to how this thing came into existence. Duncan, what are your thoughts on that?
Right, yeah, Turin Shroud, fantastic subject. Well, I suppose that the real thing for me is the case we don't actually start hearing about I think the first record we have it was like 1350 something. And then the first actual letter written about it was in 1383, something like that, by the Bishop of Troyes. And the interesting thing about that, this is the first church report on this, on the Turin Shroud. And the bishop is reporting that it's a fake. That's the first record we actually have it from, almost like an independent source. And it's from the church and it's a fake. I think it even goes down to the sense that he's actually spoken to the artist who created it. And that's in the letter as well. So besides that, the actual interesting thing I think about it is the case for the majority of its existence, it's been actually the property of the church. And even to this day, they neither confirm or reject its authenticity. I mean, they are undecided. So if the church themselves are undecided on it, you're going to have a pretty hard time trying to convince me it's authentic. But that's the whole point of these discussions, isn't it?
Well, I can't disagree with you on the church. And on that subject, let's talk about the Bible and the crucifixion. Now, we know that the story is told within the Bible in great detail. In fact, it goes through the Passion of Christ, telling us that Jesus would have been put onto a cross and then taken down from that cross and put into a tomb or some kind of cave. Traditionally, he would have been wrapped in some linen, and that is where we get the shroud from. Now, we know that he wasn't prepared in traditional Jewish customs, and we're not quite sure how he was prepared because that doesn't say in the Bible. But what we do know is that the shroud is mentioned in all four Gospels. Now, on Easter Friday, he would have been taken and put into the tomb, and on Easter Sunday, he was resurrected, and essentially when people came to get the body, he was gone. But it is said that the linen was left. Now, if the linen was left, I think that somebody would have picked it up. Somebody would have taken it. And that would have been an artifact they would have kept through their families for years and years and years, being something very, very special. Many believe that Jesus was resurrected, and that was a spiritual process where he ascended up to heaven. And on that fact, they believe that when he did ascend to heaven, he burnt an image onto the shroud. And that is where we get the image of Jesus and why this doesn't look like it's completely caked or painted on. It's just on the surface, because this was a spiritual process, and potentially why people find it very, very difficult to actually do that type of thing now, to make it look exactly as it looks. So, for me, this story's starting to add up. But what about you, Duncan?
Right, okay, my impression of that. Obviously, the concept of being objective. It's tricky when, of course, you're talking about such a person so connected to so many faiths. So please, yes, I'm just taking this as being objective. Let's say it did happen, that Christ was there, then I can accept that even of course, he wouldn't be as famous and as renowned as he is now. But yes, he would have had followers, and if there was something left in there, there is a chance it would have been taken. Because, of course, I assumed at that point, taking the gospel as gospel, then yes, Christ is gone. So this is the last thing you have of him. So yes, somebody would have kept it. So yeah, all of that is possible if, of course, you believe the literal text of the story. But when we take it to the Turin Shroud, there's so many things for me that just don't balance through. One is the case of the body itself. It's if the shroud is meant to be wrapped round him, then of course when it's wrapped round, we have it round our face, which is a three-dimensional thing. You put a cloth around it. When you pull it away, the face will be distorted because that's flat there. But when you pull it flat, his face would be huge. And so why isn't it? If this is meant to be a direct impression from with this thing being wrapped around him, it's not. It's a two-dimensional shape on something that would have been wrapped around a three-dimensional body. You could do it at any point. I think there's a Japanese art that actually you paint your face and you print it onto a piece of paper with the idea of it coming out as abstract, because that's just the way it is. So that's why I have a problem. The first problem I have with it being an actual wrapping of a body. When it comes to the ascension burning, I suppose now we're going into the terms of miracles. So, of course, I suppose that is the miracle interpretation of why a two-dimensional image appears on a three-dimensional wrapping. And the problem I have with that is it burns two-dimensionally, but it doesn't do the ascension, which actually means to go up. So, of course, okay, we get his front. But then why do we get the back? Because the Turin Shroud has both the image on the back, the front of the person, and the back of the person. And so that burning sensation that's meant to be the ascension of the ascension, for some reason, burns both ways. Which then, this is the tricky part, because we're now going to talk about possibly one of the most revered characters of history, and I'm going to be talking about certain parts of his anatomy that one wouldn't expect to be talking about. And for instance, when you look at the back, you have Jesus's bottom, and it's a perfectly formed bottom, which is actually a bit of a problem, because if he's lying on his back, and of all of us who have lied on our back or for some mad reason pressed our bottoms against a piece of glass, it deforms the bum, and his bum's not deformed. I'm sorry, I'm talking about Christ's bum here. Very strange, but it's not. So why is it not? Which, of course, then, unfortunately, then have to go to the flip side, where we have to look at the probability of how his body is laid. Now, in history, there's been, I think, 2 or 3 bodies of crucifixion ever found, to my understanding. And when they've been found, the arms have been down at the side. Or the most common way of burial is, if a body is buried with reverence, it's hands across the chest. It seems rather peculiar that when they enshrouded this body, they decided to put his hands over his, genitalia. Why? It was that we haven't seen a body laid in that way. Also, it's just proven, as people said, if it's a dead body, even with rigor mortis set in, the hands would just not stay there. The weight of the the shoulders will always drop the hands to the side. If you try to lay them across your genitalia, it doesn't. So why are the hands there? It makes sense if the hands are there, if it's meant to be an artistic representation, or if it's meant to be a fake, but you don't want to make it too embarrassing, that you draw or you present the figure with the hands over the genitalia. And where there are arguments for and against about how anatomically correct the body is, most people agree that the hands are elongated. I mean, someone can have big hands, but these are elongated hands because of the proportions of the arm to keep it in perspective, to keep the character's modesty intact. The hands are just in a peculiar place if this is just a concept of accident or even by design, other than a piece of art. So I'm sorry, the actual presentation of the art just makes it that.
Well, you make a compelling argument about the hands, but before I get to that, I want to talk about the impression onto the shroud. Now, the most obvious markings when you look at it are of a church fire, actually, the remnants of a church fire that we can see. They're the strongest images on there because there are some burn marks. However, we can still see the image, which is fantastic. It doesn't really obscure the picture of the man. One thing that's really key here is that the shroud, we know, went on tour. It went to lots of different churches and cathedrals. And it was given to at least 50 artists who had some time with it and could try and copy it and actually use it. Some are even said to have done some rubbings, etc. with it. So looking back at some of those, these are terrible, terrible copies. Nobody can even get close at the same time as we believe this was made. So that's something, if we're talking about how the shroud was made, is always good to keep in your mind. It goes on to the fact that nobody today is able to create it or recreate it in the same way because they can get the image very close or they can get the chemical makeup very close, but they can't seem to get both. And that's why this is a fantastic mystery. That's what makes this well worth talking about. But I want to talk about the hands. I want to talk about these elongated hands. I want to talk about the feet and the crown, because these are all things that we see within the image. And one of the most startling things to me is that during the Middle Ages, they felt that when people were crucified, it would be a nail through the centre, through the palm of the hand. And we see that through their art. The same with the feet. They felt that the pin or the nail would be put through the centre of the foot. Having looked back at the way that the Romans did things now, it is said that they'd had a different technique. That actually the nail would have gone through the wrist of the arms and it would have gone through the ankles in the feet. And of course, both of those are depicted on this shroud, but not depicted in other art around the medieval time. Now, Duncan, you brought to the attention the hands and how elongated they are, and I think that's definitely something which looks a bit odd. However, one thing that is very, very noticeable is that there are no thumbs. And one of the reasons that's been put forward for that, a professor from America has said that actually, if you put a nail through the wrist, what happens is we lose the tendons or the tension in the thumbs, and they tend to go inside the hand. So again, something quite detailed that a medieval man or woman would have had to have known to actually put this together. Unless, of course, we believe that it was some kind of coincidence. Now, if we compare it, it's very, very different. You know, if we compare it to medieval art at the time, it's very, very different. And one of the other things is that we look at the back of the shroud, which you just discussed, and it has lots of small lacerations on his back where we know that he was whipped. But again, in medieval art, they thought that it was an actual whip, a traditional whip used, not what we now come to believe the Romans used, which was a whip with some metal sort of ball bearings on the end, which would have made marks just like the shroud. Now, this is all circumstantial. I appreciate that. And I know that these things are all starting to add up. And for me, they create a really, really good story and almost start to make me believe that this is the most simple solution. But Duncan, what do you think?
Right. Well, with credit to you, I think it's more than circumstantial. I mean, to me, this is almost like compelling evidence, if taken on its own, which we'll get onto. Because especially, I'm not so sure about the thumbs. I mean, if you relax your hands, your thumbs naturally go in it anyway. But and I think how much more relaxed can you be when you're dead? I know there's rigor mortis, but once rigor mortis isn't standard. It's there for a period of time, and then the whole body goes back to relaxing again. But the things like the nails and the coffin, and if I remember rightly, when that study was done, it was actually done independently. And then, of course, someone related it to the Turin Shroud, and well, hang, those two things match, that is, I think, compelling. The whipping on the back, it could be. I think sometimes we don't give an awareness of the credit of awareness to people of certain times. I mean, the Romans were, what was it, going into the 1600s, 600s onwards. If they have developed a good whip, there is a good chance that whip is still being used. I think there's a certain license that artists know. This is, we'll look at a horse whip because that makes more sense. They don't show the full brutality of a whip that would still be in existence. But no, it's still stuff there, more than you would actually expect. But on this sense of, can the art like that be reproduced? I'd say yes. I mean, one of the big examples for that is another relic, which is actually more revered than actually the Turin Shroud in most churches' eyes, is like the Veil of Veronica, which is a relic that has a facial imprint of Christ. But when you look at it, it's dark. It looks like it's trying to be authentic. But when you look at it, it is clearly a work of art. But it comes from a legend where Saint Veronica wiped the face of Christ as he's going to the crucifixion, and he had his face imprinted on it. Now, you look at the standard of that, and you see that as being accepted, and you can see it actually as a work of art, which to me is almost paradoxical when you say this stuff can't be reproduced when there is a sort of reproduction. And it came to, and when it became a relic, that was in the 1300s, mid 1300s, exactly the same time as this Turin Shroud turns up. And so there is this market, there is this concept of these relics coming forward, some being accepted, which are of a lower quality. And this particular bishop turns around and says, it's really good, but is it fake? Is it fake? And he gets it to be a fake. But to me, I love the stuff that you put forward. I genuinely do. And you're right. This is the thing why it makes it a good thing to discuss. But the compelling stuff for me is the modern science that's gone into it. The stuff that, for me, is irrefutable, where you're looking at modern science.
Okay, let's go through that then. So we know that a French professor was one of the first people in the early 1900s to be given access to the shroud and to have a look at it from a scientific perspective. He was the person that was known for finding blood on the shroud, and also to say that he felt that it was anatomically correct, because before that nobody had really studied it in any great detail. We had some other small studies in between that time until it gets to 1978, and a group of people called STURP, who were a mixture of different scientists from different disciplines, had lobbied the church and asked if they could come and spend some time with the shroud and do some proper experimentation. That was granted, and the big thing that they were going to do was carbon dating. Now, we know now that carbon dating is used forensically all the time, and it's something that really, is accepted as truth. Now, they took, I think it was 4 samples and sent them to 3 different laboratories for carbon dating. Then all of those results came back and they put them together, and they came out with the number 1260 to 1390. Now, that puts it bang slap in the middle of the time when we believe it first came out as a medieval relic. So it wasn't a slam dunk for people that believed in the Turin Shroud for sure, and it certainly was a slam dunk for anybody that was a naysayer. But for my theory, this is something that needs to be looked at a little bit further. I think they probably need to check that carbon dating a little bit more. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that the church initiated some people to come in and to start looking at the shroud, because I believe that should be done with lots of these old relics which are hanging about. Because if we find one, just one that's correct, then that would prove a lot of the theories around Jesus. But what do you think, Duncan? What are your thoughts on the more sort of modern scientific history of this?
Well, obviously, I love it. It's as you say, it's a slam dunk. We have, like the thing I liked about the supporting evidence, in the sense of you have the way of being crucified, found it independently, cross-reference to the Turin Shroud. That's nice and compelling. how compelling can it be that we have the first documented history of it being the middle of the 14th century, 1300s, first record of it. The first letter written about it is in 1383, around about that time. And we have the carbon dating smack bam in that period. I mean, you have the two factual things we have about it. The first time it exists and the actual date it was measured at. It's a no-brainer for it. You say a concept about the church, good for them for letting it done. I must admit, I have a bit of empathy for them there, because I remember reading about the negotiations, because the scientists came to me, right, we want to do this, and we want test samples, and we want all these bits and pieces, we're sending it here, then the other. And the church went, hang on, well, no, we'll offer you this. And the scientists came back, well, clearly you just don't want to know. You don't want to be proven as, you're against science and things like that. And the church actually released a statement to him and say, look, we have to agree with you now, because if we've been blackmailed into it, because either we go with your things or you're going to say that we're trying to hold things back or stuff like that. We're just trying to be respectful. But okay, you can have what you want. We'll let you do it. But to be honest, you blackmailed us into doing it. And I have empathy for them. It is nasty that approach was actually taken for it, or seems bad to be taken for it. But the great thing is, it was done. And I'm sorry, you say about it's accommodating is a truth. And truth is a theory. This is an indisputable fact. It's been scientifically, we use it for everything, for the sense when we're looking at archaeological digs. And so we did it, it's done. This is the time it was built and done. Irrefutable.
Well, you say irrefutable, and that's correct, if the samples are correct. Now, there is a theory, and it is only a theory, that the sample that they took was actually from a repair. Now, that would make a lot of sense, because if this had lived in a box or had lived in a cupboard somewhere in medieval times from this family, when they took it out to show the world, it may have frayed, it may have been damaged in some way, and they wanted to make sure that it looked as good as it could. So it would make sense that they would have taken a sample from the corner, and the corner, it would make sense, could have been repaired. So for me, I quite like this theory that there had been some kind of meshing of these threads, and that's why the carbon dating comes out to that time. So I would like to see it done again. I would certainly like to see one of the theories, which I've seen before, which is fantastic, is that they would actually take the carbon dating from the burnt edges of the shroud, and I think that would give them a better result. So that's something that sort of, for me, still keeps it in the world of being a relic from the time of Jesus. I do believe this is a real item. I believe it is from the time of Jesus. I think it's a man who was crucified at that time. I don't think we can say it's Jesus. I don't think we can prove that it is Jesus in any way. Yes, it looks like it. Yes, it has all of the hallmarks that we would expect, but we just can't say that. I also think this is one of the simplest solutions. That Jesus was put on the cross, he was taken down, and traditionally wrapped in a shroud. As we know, when they go to the cave, he's not there, but the shroud is still there, and somebody keeps that and passes that down throughout history. I can see that being an object which is venerated by family as it gets passed on and on. However, if I was going to take your route, Duncan, if I was going to start thinking about other theories, one that I love is that this is Leonardo da Vinci. Actually, Leonardo is the picture of Christ there, and he did this as a bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke against the church. I also like the idea that this is some kind of early photography, because, I believe that this is kind of a burnt image on the edge of the sort of fibres of the shroud, and I think photography matches that quite well. So this is some kind of early photography experiment, maybe done by Leonardo. But I appreciate that is a very, very long stretch, and I go back to saying I think it's real. One other theory I think we've really got to look at is, were the samples swapped? Now, there's a German author who has done a lot of research and written a book on the fact that When STURP came in to do their bit, they came in and they put cameras up everywhere, and they filmed the whole sort of 3 or 4 day period that they were working on it, apart from half an hour. And that half an hour was when they were preparing and putting the samples into these 4 individual vials. Now, for me, that just creates the conspiracy that we need and that we always really thrive on. But this guy says that, he feels that there was some foul play here, and there was probably some people around who wanted this to be, seen as a medieval fake.
I have to throw conspiracy theories in for you. All right, first things first. Let's go back to the statement about the possibility that the stuff they actually carbon dated was from a repair. One of the issues with that is a case of the weave of the actual fabric itself is unique. It's a herringbone weave. And actually, one of the problems they had about sending samples off is they wanted to send off blank samples. So some labs got the Turin Shroud, some got innocent samples, so they could double check that no one's talking to each other and the results are coming through clear. One of the problems they had is the weave of the Turin Shroud is so unique that you can't replicate it. You can't do something that's similar to it, unless, of course, your modern example. See a modern example, it's not going to be real. And so we have to then imagine the sample they did get had this herringbone weave. So it must have had original material in it. And if you look at the reports from the scientists, they said when they got the reports, there was foreign material and there was cotton there that was not as old as the majority of the sample. And they took those items out because it's a set process. It's a scientific process of looking at historical things. And if you want to know how old something is, you take out the newer stuff because the older stuff there has got to be the genuine. So even if some contaminated material was in there, it then actually goes. Which then takes us on to this snooker-like theory of the missing stuff. It sounds crazy now when we say it in the context that we did. But one of the things was, because they couldn't have a sample that was going to be a neutral sample, they tried every step they could to make sure that there was no pre-empting by the scientists of what this material was, where it was taken from, who got what piece. And so I can understand why they switched the cameras off, because that's the only thing they had left. There's nothing else they could have done to stop any assurance that only a few people knew where this material was coming from. So interesting theory, but no, it doesn't do it for me. So then, sorry, I'm now thinking of Leonardo Da Vinci. The theory of that is it's a fabulous book. I would recommend reading it. Is it Lynn Pritchard and Clive? I'm sorry, I'm hopeless on names. I'm sure you'll get it. I would recommend reading the book because one thing, they promised to you that you would see a painting of Leonardo da Vinci, and once they've pointed this fact out to you, you can never see that painting the same way again. And it's absolutely true. You'll see this famous painting and it just changes your view. But as for the Turin Shroud being a photograph of Leonardo da Vinci, the main thing I find actually funny is the case of, it's a typical man thing, isn't it? For some reason, he's invented photography and the first thing he does is a nude. He doesn't just do a nude of his front, he decides to do a nude photo of his back as well, naked. I think someone told me recently, I don't know how much you could actually prove it. I mean, you look through his life story that he actually died a virgin. You kind of joke that maybe this was his dating profile he was trying to make up centuries beforehand. I have no idea, but I'm sorry. If you look into the idea of ancient photography, the clarity of the lens you would need to do for the scale of the print would have to be so pure. You couldn't create glass at that purity at that time, let alone all the other sense of what should be in the fabric at that time to produce that print. So I'm sorry. No, it doesn't do that for me.
Yeah, well, the book you're referring to is the Turin Shroud, How Da Vinci Fooled History. And that is by Lynn Pinknett and Clive Prince, who have given talks before at Minerva. their book's really interesting, and it's a sort of, again, it's this tongue-in-cheek way that Leonardo viewed the world, which I find so enigmatic, really. I still think this is real. And yes, we cannot prove it's Jesus, but I do think this is real. And one thing that I will say is that we do Minerva so that people can watch us. We give a surface amount of information really on these mysteries, and hope that people then take this video and go away and do some further study on it themselves, because, you know, we can't fit everything into these videos. And one thing that I will say as a little tidbit, which is exactly what you should go and look at, is a thing called the Pray Manuscript. Now, it's from 1196, and so it fits just before the carbon dating, which is really interesting. And it shows a picture of the shroud. It's a drawing, and it has holes in it. And it has the same holes in it as the shroud. So that's something I think our viewers and watchers can go away and have a look at for themselves, because this is a mystery. You know, and this is something that people have been tearing over for years and years and years. And it's something that obviously we completely disagree on, Duncan, but it's also something that there is more research to be done. So we would love to hear people's comments about exactly what they think this is. But my overriding thing here is still that this is real. But I want to hear your final comments on this.
I like how you emphasize you want to hear my final comments. You can't take any more of my negativity. You just want the final comments. Yep. Okay. Fair play. Yeah, it is a fascinating topic, and there is. I concede that there are two sides of it, and not just a sense of emotive sides. I still think the arguments about the style of crucifixion and the injuries that there are quite compelling. But it's the history stuff of the scientific stuff that just nails it. Sorry, pun not intended, for me. So, what do I actually think it is? I do think it's a fake. I do think it's an actual work of art. The purpose behind it, I can think of two theories. One, that during this time, during this very period of time, there were, for hundreds of years earlier, during there was a festival where you perform, villagers would perform what's called mystery plays, and the most common one to do was a play about the passing, the resurrection. And these were presented almost like a ritual fashion. There's even a theory, quite established theory, that even the rituals of Freemasonry are based on the same thing, that you're presenting a play to convey a moral story. And these were famous, and these were annual things that villages used to do. And around about this period, an edict came out from the church saying that, because the priests used to be involved with this, the priests were then banned from doing it. This is something that you should not be doing. The priesthood stays in the church, and this other stuff that's going on, that you shouldn't get involved. So I can imagine that, again, we don't give people people in past history credit for their artistic talents. And I think if you've got a mystery play and you're going to have this shroud thing come in about the resurrection, about the finding this shroud in the church, somebody made a damn good, I hate to say it, but a damn good prop for these shows. But of course, when these plays got stopped, you wouldn't throw away something that is in itself a work of art, you know, and so it gets folded, it gets put into a church. And it only takes, 50 years is virtually 3 generations of lives at that sort of time. So 3 generations, somebody goes back in the church, they find this thing and go, wow, this is impressive. I wonder if it is. Maybe the people who were funding the plays were the family who claimed to have it in the first place. And maybe an ex-cousin then comes up and does it. It could be a prop. Or it could be, as the first bishop turned around and said, this man has made it as a fake. It's at the same time when the Veronica veil is found and it is used in it, and which is clearly a fake. It is clearly a work of art. A better artist does this and tries to get it off, and the bishop turns around, no, this is a fake. How it's done, I'm not an expert in art, but there's certain things that the highest one I think that comes up where someone says it's a rubbing. We know when they did brass rubbings and bits and pieces. The trouble with the 3-dimensional stuff is if you try to do something as the same scale as a human face and you do a rubbing, it will be distorted. But if you do a sculpture where the face is shallow, so the face is still three-dimensional, but only slightly raised, and you do a rubbing of that, then you'll get the whole image. It will be exactly as you see it on the Turin Shroud. Now, there is a possibility that you do that, you put some kind of dust on top of it, you lay it on top, it could be done. But as you say yourself, if it's something that seems to be slightly burnt in the fabric, if you make this sculpture out of something like iron and then you heat it and then you put the fabric on top, again, you're going to get this lovely teasing image into a fabric. Again, whether that was made as a prop for a play or maybe it was actually made to try and make a relic to get into a church, I don't know. But everything points to me as a sense of the two-dimensional image from a three-dimensional icon, from the sense of when it was made, the first record of it made, the carbon dating of it, it all seems to match these skills and abilities. So to me, unfortunately, is a fake, but a beautiful work of art.
Well, I love the idea of this being a prop, and actually I think that's got some validity in it. However, we haven't discussed one other thing that people can go away and look at, which is that maybe this was used in a ritual and actually popped out of a box during a Friday ceremony at church. There are some stories of this being frightening to people who saw it because Jesus was basically being resurrected in front of them. So again, another thread to this story that you can go away and have a look at and potentially research yourself. So my closing on this is very simple. I think it's too tough to fake. I think if you look at the abilities of the time, they just couldn't have produced something of this quality. So I think the simple and honest fact is that this is real. However, as I always say, we can't prove this 100%. So it all comes down to faith and belief. There's just too much circumstantial evidence for me, but please let us know what you think. We would love to hear your comments below. We would also like you to subscribe to the channel, and please give us a like if you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you again very soon.